Hello, my name's Father Ken Dean, and this is my wonderful, beautiful, lovely daughter-in-law, Jackie Dean. And together we're going to share a Lenten meditation, kind of landing in the, the theme of Good Friday. It's a little bit unusual. This was something Jackie was reading for work, and she was discussing with some of her fellow workers and I saw it, picked it up, started reading it, and was struck by what an appropriate parallel there is in this journey to this Lenten journey, to this story. And so I just thought, well, we would talk about it and share it with you. Anyway, the story is from the Republic of Plato. And it's the chapter, book 7, where he talks about the cave and how our image of our nature is like this parable of the cave, where we are sitting in darkness in a cave with our arms and our feet bound in chains. And there's this wall behind us that's almost like a puppeteer's wall. And there are men that are parading images at the top of this wall with an artificial light behind it. And everyone in the cave, bound in the cave, just sees the images going by on the wall. And this is their reality. They have no other reality but this. And it is so much their reality that they, even if they talk to each other, begin to discuss the images they see. They name them. You know, that's a dog, that's a whatever, you know. And they have no other reality. And in fact, if they hear anything behind them from the men, they just naturally assume that that's the noise that image is making. So this becomes their total reality. And then Plato says, but what if one guy, one of the people, is freed, but not just freed, but he's drug out, because this is a place that's comfortable for them, and it's not necessarily something that they want to leave. But if he's drug out and he begins to turn around and see the opening of the cave and the bright light, at first he's just going to be blinded, and he's going to be confused. And as he journeys into it, it's like his first desire is to go back. I just want to return to where it's comfortable and look at the shadows, and because that's what the darkness is what I'm used to. My eyes are in tune to darkness. But the more that he is drug out into the light, there's a progression of him being able to see what's in the light. At first, he can only look at things, you know, in the shadows of things, because for him, the shadow of something that's real is more real, because that's all that he was accustomed to was the shadows. And but gradually, then he's able to look at the reflection of images, like in water or something like that. And then progressively, he begins to be able to see the images, the real images themselves, this real world.
In the source of light.
In the source of real light, of the true light. Yeah. And so, but then he, as he begins to enjoy it and marvel in it, he comes to a place where he doesn't want to just live there for his own good. He wants to go back and free some of his friends. And so he starts trying to return to the cave and tell his friends about what's real, and they think he's crazy. You know, what are you talking about? You're a lunatic. And he tries to get them to come with him, and they don't want to come. And so the thing that struck me about this, as I'm in the middle of my Lenten journey, and the way Jackie and I have talked about it, is that, you know, Lent is a time of the year where we're reminded of how much our nature is to live in a cave of darkness. The cave of darkness is the world around us. It's It's what we know. It's what we can see.
Our comforts.
It's our comforts. It's all of these things. And we don't even realize how often that we are totally consumed by, by the world, our flesh, our comforts. And this journey into Lent is a journey to turn around and start looking at the real light, the real world, the kingdom of God, the future kingdom, which is hard to see. And even when you do get a glimpse of it, it's something that's hard to even make out. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the best we can do is look at the shadows of it, because the shadows are what we're used to. I mean, example would be, heaven being portrayed as streets of gold, or all of the other images that are images God's given us to make us wonder and have awe about it. But they're still just images for a created man using his created brain, with created language, and so they're limited. And being able to see beyond those limits of what the future kingdom, who we are really as kingdom residents, really what it really looks like. So anyway, the first thing that struck me as we were reading this, Jackie, was this first line where Plato says, next then, I said, make an image of our nature in its education and want of education. What does that mean to you?
Well, what's interesting is that, so I discussed this, I'm in education, so I discussed this with educators yesterday. And some years ago, I had learned the root of education, the Latin roots, to mean and then deuce, to bring out. So the root understanding, the root meaning of education is to bring out. And so when we think of that back in the context of, our make an image of our nature and our want of education, it's really this want of being brought out. We all desire in some regard to be brought out. And I think it's interesting to think of it in terms of course, like in my realm with education, what's that mean to be brought out for knowledge's sake, but then in a spiritual sense, to be brought out, to be brought to the light. And when we discussed it yesterday with some of my fellow colleagues, we actually started by looking at images, and really let's look at some different depictions that have been made, over time about the allegory of the cave. And one that really struck me was literally the cave underground. And that you see this series of progressions of, there's those who are bound by chains who only see the shadows, and then there's the wall, and then there are those carrying the relics, right, of real things like images of horses or whatnot, and they are cloaked, and they are themselves in darkness. It's this darkness within this darkness. And then you start to see the progression of someone who's coming out of the cave, and they're every step of the way, it's like they have to shift their orientation, and as they get closer to the surface of coming out of their cave, they're blinded by the light, and they find themselves finally, there's this image of someone who is on the ground, right, on sturdy ground, with obviously the sunlight shining on them. And one of the things we discussed was just how that's not, and even Plato talks about it, it's not that you're up there and you stay there, right? But that's why the cave is an allegory. There are different caves for us, right? For different aspects of our life in some regards. And when I think of it with Lent, of, the idea of the sacrifice, why are we fasting? We're fasting for the sacrifice of our lower self for the sake of the higher self. And what better image of that than a cave of darkness, right? You're sacrificing your literal lower self so that you can get to the surface and become a higher self. And that, but it's not that we get to this place and are there forever, right? Like it's almost like every year, Lent is this forcing mechanism to remind us you're still in the cave,
Yes.
Like there are parts of your heart, there are parts of your mind that are still in the cave. And part of what we fast from, is meant to be to really reveal those things. I just,
Yeah, the idea we were talking about earlier
Yeah.
of how trivial we treat Lent as cave dwellers, and the idea that, well, what are you going to give up for Lent? Well, I'm going to give up chocolate, I'm going
Yeah.
to give up whatever. Well,
Yeah.
that's not the journey.
Right. It's no more helping you really see the true nature of things, right? Like, it may reveal a little bit about a comfort. And as someone who even grew up in Lent, I never even understood Lent. I still am on a journey to understand Lent more in adulthood.
I never even heard the
Yeah,
word
it just
Lent
wasn't. That was something Catholics do,
Right,
And I
exactly.
knew we weren't Catholics, so I didn't have to give up anything for 40 days. Whereas when Noel and I this past year, we had a Episcopal monk, Brother Jim, who came to visit our church in Helena. And it was some really, really just enlightening teaching on Lent. And it was very much predicated upon sacrifice of the lower for the higher, and that it is really just the start too, like we get to Good Friday. That doesn't mean that our Lenten journey is over. Brother Jim was like, at best, maybe you've just like scratched the surface to continue going. And that, again, it goes back to this forcing mechanism for us to really start to try and orient and recognize how we are in darkness. The first place for us to even be able to make the moves out of the cave or to recognize that we're in it. And Lent is a time where we recognize that we are in it. I'm curious of what, now I'm starting to think of like in terms of like, thinking of specifically the cross and like Jesus coming down in the innermost depths of the darkness for us to be able to show us.
Yeah. Talk for a minute about the way that Plato started this parable by talking about, I want you to imagine an image of our nature.
Yeah.
Versus, we live in a culture that says, well, give me the script and let me read it, so that I can understand it. And Plato's like, no, you're not going to understand it like that. I want to paint a picture for you in your mind, and then you deal with that image.
Yeah. And I can't remember whether it was, we discussed this before, this Socrates or Plato or Aristotle, but someone about that time in the realm of Greek philosophers, when things were starting to be written down, right? When we were starting to say let's bring literacy to the masses in that regard, there was a pushback of, well, if we do that, we will lose actually some sense of thought. Because when we go from an oral culture and a culture that very much like images were so important, right? We think of like our earliest writings throughout human history, they're hieroglyphics, they're images on caves, right? So that we're seeing, and that this is a conversation, but conversation predicated on the image, because it's the image that is most important. Like even Plato within this it's a conversation between a student and a teacher. And the teacher's not going to give the answers.
Yeah.
And it's not, and that's purposeful, right? To not say this is not, and I think sometimes we get in that regard too, of even in like Lent, of like, well, just tell me what I need to do.
Right.
Like what are the things I should give up?
Right.
What's the...
Just tell me, I don't want to have to, it's so interesting that you say that too, because it reminds me also of some of the limitations of our most frequent kind of Western Christian disciplines. Is we want to be spoon-fed. I want to pick up my devotional. I want to just go to today's date. I want somebody to tell me what it means for me, and that's not bad.
Yeah.
But if that's all we have, and we don't have this other of coming before the true ideal or the true image in a meditative, contemplative way, of giving God room to interact with our minds and to lead us, and for us to grow not just in understanding, but really just in desire.
Yeah.
And because all of us, I mean, it's kind of a fearful thing, you know, and we live in such a distracted
Yeah.
society, which I think that this is a really good point for the cave, is that we are masters of distraction. We've got messages that are coming to us from every angle, you know, every day. We're in the middle of this coronavirus thing, and of course now we're bombarded with all the new learnings, all the new statistics, all the new everything, and that's important. It's not. I don't want to trivialize that, but the idea in this season that we are in the church calendar part of the year where we're supposed to remember that this is not our home.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a far country, and we're journeying toward the cross. We're remembering our own baptism as we joined Christ in his death in our baptism, and we're headed for Good Friday. And the idea that moving towards the cross means that we're moving towards our cross, that we're moving towards joining Christ in a way that is culminated by our death, that we die so that the fullness of him, the fullness of a future kingdom resident can be formed in us. And what's interesting to me is that as most of us that have had loved ones die or heard the stories, that at that moment when you're making that transition of how they see the light and they're drawn towards this light. And I don't know if Plato had that in mind. I don't know if that happened back before Christ. I know that all truth is God's truth and stuff, but it's real interesting when you think about that our journey out of the cave is also a journey out of the far country. You know, it's a journey beyond the shadows that we live in and beyond the appetites and beyond the stuff towards what's real, and it's supposed to be blinding, and it's going to be blinding, and so I never intended, I never thought about the cave as a Lenten meditation, but it actually, I think the thing that has touched me most about it is it's forced me to deal with the image. I'm having to deal with the image of the bonds that I really live in, the blindness that I really have, and the image of what it means to move towards the cross, to move towards the real light. You know, we all have had our moments as followers of Christ with different profound emotional experiences, especially in Good Friday services and things like that. But so many of those, after you walk out, or you leave, or wherever you're at, it doesn't last. It doesn't linger very long. My hope and prayer this year is that maybe this lingers a little bit longer as I contemplate the image of the darkness that I forget I live in. And that moving out of the cave, moving towards the light, is an intentional effort, and it's not comfortable. That if someone hadn't drugged me, if God hadn't drugged me, I wouldn't want to go. And that in whatever awareness I have from being able to step out of the cave, that it's not for my benefit just to enjoy whatever glimpses of true light that I have. But I have a responsibility also to try to go back and try to help others come out of the darkness too. So Have a blessed Good Friday. I hope your Lenten journey was a journey that will linger as we move from today, joining Christ on the cross, and then tomorrow, the wonderful journey of the great vigil, where we come out of death to new life. So God bless you. Thanks for watching this. And just for the heck of it, why don't you pick up a copy of Plato's Book 7 on the Republic of Plato and read it. Or better yet, why don't you just pull up a picture of it? They're all over Google, and just look at the image.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Amen.
Jackie.
Thank you, Father Ken.
Okay.
Father.
Father.